Welcome back to 1834. Bourdonnais is winning 4 games to 2, so McDonnell has some catching up to do. It's the first to win 6 games, draws not included, who will take this match. Today's special guest commentator is the man with a plan, Baldric, an old friend of the channel. Let's begin. E4 and now C5, and we've not seen one of these since the last game of match 2, which McDonnell won taking that match. If you remember, he liked to play F4 over and over again no matter what happened, but this time he goes for something different that we've not seen before, knight to F3. So we continue with knight to C6 and now D4, so the pawn captures, the knight captures back, and Bourdonnais pushes his pawn to E5 to threaten the knight. So the knight here simply captures the other knight, and the B pawn recaptures. We have bishop to C4, and knight to F6 now, continuing to develop. And McDonnell decides to pin the knight against the queen with his bishop. Bourdonnais brings his bishop out, and now we have castles from McDonnell. H6, trying to chase away the bishop, so the bishop captures the knight, the queen captures back. Knight to C3, again continuing to develop, and A5 from Bourdonnais. Now you can see that Bourdonnais is attacking the f-pawn with both the bishop and the queen, and the bishop is also pinning the pawn, so McDonnell decides to unpin, moving his king aside, which seemingly undefends the pawn. Baldric suggests capturing it with the bishop, but if you were to do that, it's not such a great idea because McDonnell has QE2, the Queen Elizabeth move, and now you're losing your bishop because it's pinned against the queen. So Bourdonnais doesn't do what Baldric suggests, instead he plays D6, and McDonnell doesn't go for the Queen Elizabeth move, he plays to D2 instead, and we have G5, Bourdonnais going on the attack. Rook on A to D1, doubling up behind the queen, and now king to E7, getting off the back rank. Knight to A4, where it can't be attacked by any pawns because the B pawn is missing. It is attacking the dark square bishop, so the dark square bishop moves forward to D4 out of the way. Queen to D3, and Bourdonnais continues pushing his wing pawns. Queen to B3, lining up with the bishop against the pawn next to the king, but it is defended by the king and the queen, so there's no clear way through there for McDonnell just yet. But Bourdonnais continues pushing his pawns, H4. And now McDonnell plays F3, and notice that he's only able to do this because of moving his king aside earlier to break the pin of the bishop, so awesome foresight there from McDonnell. Bourdonnais, however, just continues pushing his wing pawns, H3, and McDonnell defends by pushing G3, and there doesn't seem to be a clear way for Bourdonnais to continue his storm anymore. But the game itself does continue. Bourdonnais plays bishop to D7, getting off the back rank and joining up his rooks. We have C3 from McDonnell, chasing away the bishop, but for now Bourdonnais ignores it because he attacks McDonnell's queen. So the queen goes back to C2, and now Bourdonnais gets his bishop out of there, all the way back to A7. McDonnell shifts his queen across to D2, and this generates multiple threats. First of all, he's doubling up with the rook against the other pawn next to the king, although it is defended twice, so again, no way through there just yet. It's attacking the G-pawn, which only has one defender, the black queen, and more subtly he's x-raying the A5 pawn here on the wing, which is starting to look kind of weak. Bourdonnais defends his G-pawn with his rook, and McDonnell is really thinking of attacking this A5 pawn. He'd like to replace his bishop here with his knight, so he starts maneuvering to achieve this. He pushes B3, he wants to move the bishop out of the way and bring his knight around to C4. Bourdonnais brings his other rook across to try to x-ray the white queen, and McDonnell continues with his plan. We have now rook to G7 from Bourdonnais, and the bishop comes back to E2 out of the way of the C4 square. Bourdonnais brings his queen to G6, and now there's no way to defend the A5 pawn. The knight's coming to C4 as planned. We now have bishop to C5 from Bourdonnais. So, of course, McDonnell captures the A-pawn. He's now got a passed pawn on the wing because, again, the B-pawn has been missing since early in the opening, and he's just captured Bourdonnais' A-pawn. Bourdonnais tries to slow him down by bringing his rook across, but of course McDonnell is going to start pushing his pawns. This threatens the bishop, so the bishop retreats to attack the knight, and again the knight retreats back to C4, which attacks the bishop, but more importantly attacks the D6 pawn 3 times, and this pawn can no longer be saved. It's only defended by the king and the queen. So what can Bourdonnais do here? Well, It turns out not very much. He brings his queen across to f6 and gives up the pawn to the rampaging knight. He brings his rook back to the back rank, doubling up again, but Le Bourdonnais is in even more trouble now. McDonnell could bring his knight back to c4, threaten the dark square bishop, and reveal an attack on the light square bishop simultaneously, which would be very nice, but he doesn't go for this. Instead, the rampaging knight captures another pawn. And you can see that you can't recapture the knight again here because of this double attack on the bishop. If you use the king, you're getting the bishop captured with check. If you use the queen, again, it's with check, and you're allowing a queen exchange after the king moves. So what does Le Bourdonnais do instead of capturing the knight here? Well, he brings his bishop to e6. This saves the bishop, but it also threatens the knight, so the knight runs away to d6. We have rook on g to d8, and McDonnell pushes c4, and at this point we just have a massive exchange fest. The bishop captures the pawn, the bishop captures the bishop, the rook captures the knight, the queen captures the rook with check. There's a queen exchange, ending up with the rook on d6, and finally the king captures the rook. McDonnell continues with rook to b1, and we have bishop to d4, and McDonnell decides that he's going to give up his a pawn in exchange for Le Bourdonnais' h pawn. He brings his bishop down to f1, the rook comes across and they capture each other's pawns like this. The bishop comes back to g2, and Le Bourdonnais forces a rook exchange, rook to b2. He's threatening this pawn, so McDonnell captures the rook and the bishop captures back. So we've now got an opposite colour bishop endgame, and these are usually drawish, but McDonnell does have 2 extra pawns, so maybe it's enough for him to win it. His king is in the corner, so he's going to have to advance it up the board. We have bishop to f1, king to e6. This bishop move got out of the way of the king, so it comes to g2. Bishop to f6, bishop to h3, and now the bishop threatens the white pawn. So the white pawn advances, it's now defended by the bishop, but the black pawn captures it, the bishop captures back, and now bishop to d4. King to g4, continuing to get towards the center of the board, bishop to e3, and now McDonnell pushes h4. So this pawn captures and the king captures back. So McDonnell still has 2 extra pawns, one of which is a pass pawn. Is it enough for him to win? I have no idea. Let's continue. Bishop to c5, king to g4 again, bishop down to f2, and here McDonnell pushes f4, trying to break through. But Le Bourdonnais does not capture it here. Instead, he goes back to d4 with his bishop. We have king down to f3, and now the bishop comes to c3. King back up to g4, bishop back up to d4, and McDonnell tries something different. He brings his king up to h5, trying to find a way through this way, but the bishop comes down to f2 and threatens the rearmost pawn, so the king comes back to defend it, and bishop to d4 again. Again, McDonnell tries something different. He brings his bishop to d3. The bishop comes back to e3, and so the king attacks it, but it just comes back to d2. So what is going on here? Why can't McDonnell just push his pawns through like this? Well, let's try it and see what happens. Let's push f5, and then you're simply going to bring the bishop up here, but you're going to start bringing the king up to try to help the pawn across, but the bishop is just going to keep moving up and down this diagonal while you do so. And now the king is in position, try to push the pawn. Well, the bishop comes back to d2, and now there's no way to progress the pawn, because if you push it, the bishop's capturing it. And all the bishop has to do is just stay on this nice diagonal, and the king can do whatever it likes, and you're not getting through. So if we get back to the position that was achieved in the game here, it was here that they both agreed to a draw, and unfortunately McDonnell didn't win this one. I think he had a few opportunities and he was playing well, so bad luck to him, but well done to Le Bourdonnais for forcing the draw. I'll see you again next time for the next game.